There are confessions and there are confessions. There is the confession that arrives from guilt. That needs to be said because the weight of not saying it has become greater than the weight of the consequence of saying it. That is organized around the relief of the person confessing rather than the benefit of the person receiving it. And there is the other kind. The kind that arrives not from guilt but from the specific clear-eyed, I am running out of time quality of someone who has been carrying something that was never a burden, that was always a gift, freely given without the expectation of acknowledgement, and who wants before they go to give the gift of knowing it was given. To say, I did a thing. I did it for you. I did not need you to know. I am telling you now so that you know, and so that when I am gone, you have the knowing. That is the kind of confession that changes things backward, not in the way of revealing something that was wrong, but in the way of illuminating something that was right the whole time, and that the person receiving it did not have the full picture of and who now does. This is a story about that kind of confession. About a man named Arthur who made it in the last week of his life to his wife of 51 years, Mabel, who received it in the specific, quiet, nothing will be the same quality of a woman hearing something that reframed 51 years in the time it took him to say it. And about Mabel, who was 79 years old, and who came to a Family Feud stage with her granddaughter and her great-niece and her daughter-in-law and her son-in-law, and who answered Steve Harvey's question about Arthur with the plain, direct. This is what he said voice she used for everything and produced, in Steve Harvey, the specific, complete. I need a moment response of a man who received what Arthur had confessed, and who understood immediately what it was, and who walked off the stage for 70 seconds because that was what the thing required. This is the story of what Arthur said, and of what Steve Harvey said when he came back, and of what Mabel said when Steve Harvey said it, which was the last word on the subject, and which was the right last word, and which the room was going to carry forward from the afternoon. Hit that like button and subscribe right now before we go any further, because this channel is here for exactly these stories, for the confessions that give the gift of knowing, and we come back with one every single week. Now let us talk about Mabel. Mabel Gaines was 79 years old and had been born in Shreveport, Louisiana in 1945, and had spent her life in a deliberate, organized, forward-moving way that was the product of the specific, particular circumstances of being a black woman born in Louisiana in 1945, and of having decided, at some early point, that she could not fully identify, but that she placed somewhere around age 14. That the circumstances were the facts of the ground she was walking on, and that the ground being what it was did not change where she was going, only informed how she was going to get there. She had gone. She had graduated from Grambling State University in 1966 with a degree in elementary education, and had spent 33 years teaching second grade in Shreveport and then in Atlanta, where she and Arthur had moved in 1972 for Arthur's work. She had taught second grade with the specific, patient, comprehensive warmth of someone who had understood from the beginning that what she was doing in the second grade classroom was not separate from the larger project of what she had decided at 14, which was the project of people going where they were going regardless of the ground. She had sent hundreds of children forward. She had been, by the account of everyone who had been in her classroom or who had sent a child to her classroom, the teacher they talked about, the specific, particular one who had seen them and who had said what she saw, and who had made the room feel like a room they were allowed to be large in. She had retired at 66 and had found retirement, unlike some people, entirely manageable because she had been building things for 66 years, and she simply continued to build things that were not classrooms. A garden that her neighbors described as the finest on the street for 15 years, a reading group that she had been running every other Tuesday for 12 years, a family that she organized with the warm, thorough, entirely non-negotiable quality she brought to everything, and that produced, in the people she organized, the specific, reliable, we-show-up quality of people who had learned from Mabel that showing up was the practice. Arthur Gaines had died 2 years ago at 81. They had been married for 51 years. He had been a civil engineer who had spent his career building infrastructure, roads, bridges, the physical connective tissue of places, and who had brought to that work the specific, methodical, I am building something that has to hold quality of someone whose professional standard was that the thing he built would outlast him and would carry weight he would never see. He had been warm in the specific, understated, shows up and does the thing way of a man for whom love was a practice rather than a performance, who had not been the effusive, words first kind of husband, but who had been the present, consistent, The thing gets done kind, which Mabel had understood from the first year, and which she had valued above the alternative because the practice outlasted the performance, and she had always known the difference. He had been a quiet man with a loud laugh and a precise mind, and a quality in the evenings of sitting in the same chair and reading the same kind of book and being, in the room, in the specific, complete. Weight of him way that some people were in rooms and that she had felt every evening for 51 years, and that she had felt the absence of every evening for 2 years, and that she was not going to describe to anyone because the description was not available, and the attempt at it would only produce the inadequate version of something that was complete, and she was not interested in inadequate versions of complete things. The deathbed confession had happened on a Thursday afternoon in March, 2 years ago, in the bedroom of the Atlanta house, with the light coming through the window in the specific, late afternoon, gold and low way that light came through that window in March. Arthur had been declining for 4 months, and had been at home for the last 6 weeks with hospice care, and Mabel had been beside him for all of it in the specific, continuous, present quality of a woman who had been beside this man for 51 years, and who was not going to stop being beside him now. He had been in the last week, moving in and out of the clarity that the end produced, the specific, particular clarity of someone for whom the approaching end had resolved the question of what mattered, and who was spending the clarity on the things that mattered. He had used one of the clarity windows on Thursday afternoon to ask Mabel to send everyone out for a few minutes. She had. They had been alone in the March light. He had looked at her with the full, direct, "I have something to say, and I am going to say it" quality that he brought to everything important, and he had said it. He told her that in 1978, 6 years into their marriage, he had been offered a position in Houston. Senior engineer, a significant company, the kind of opportunity that did not come twice. He told her he had received the offer on a Monday, and had spent the week thinking about it, and had turned it down on Friday without telling her it had been offered. He told her he had turned it down because Mabel was in her 7th year of teaching at the school in Atlanta, where she had been for 3 years, and where she had, in 3 years, built something that he could see was important. Not just a job, but something she was building that was going to matter for a long time, for the children who passed through it, and for her. He told her he had known that if he told her about the offer, she would have told him to take it. She would have organized the move. She would have found another school in Houston, and she would have been excellent there too, and she would never have said a word about what she had given up. He had known this about her, and he had known it was exactly the wrong thing for what she was building. And so he had turned the offer down without telling her, and had not told her for 44 years because he had not wanted her to feel, at any point in the 44 years, that she owed him anything. He had turned it down freely for her, and the not telling was itself the gift of the choice being made without putting the weight of it on her. He said, "I have not regretted it," he said. "The school you built in Atlanta produced 40 years of what you built, which produced children and teachers and things I cannot count and that I watched the whole time." He said, "I turned down a road for a bridge, and the bridge held more weight." He said, "I wanted you to know before I went that I did it knowing, and that I would do it again, and that there is nothing to forgive because there was nothing done against you." Mabel had received this in the specific, still, quiet quality of a woman who was receiving something that was reorganizing the architecture of 51 years in real time. Not dramatically, quietly, the way a building shifted in an earthquake, the way the whole thing moved and then settled in the same place, and you understood that the settling was in a slightly different position than it had been. She had held his hand. She had said, "You gave up Houston." He had said, "I gave up a road." He had said, "You built a bridge." She had understood what he meant because she was Mabel, and she had always understood what he meant, which was one of the reasons 51 years had been what it was. She had said, "You should have told me." He had said, "I know, I didn't want you to carry it." She had said, "It wasn't yours to carry alone." He had said, "I know that too, I'm sorry. I'm telling you now because I want you to have it." She had held his hand. She had said, "I have it." He had said, "I know you do." He had died the following Tuesday. Their daughter Patricia, 54, was an attorney in Atlanta who had her mother's directness and her father's methodical intelligence, and who was here because she was always where Mabel was. Patricia's husband, Reginald, 56, was a high school principal who had been in the family for 28 years, and who had the warm, organized, steady quality of a man who had run complicated institutions, and who had applied this quality to the family with the same thoroughness he applied to everything. Mabel's granddaughter, Kezia, 24, was Patricia's daughter, a graduate student in public health who had Mabel's warmth and Arthur's precision, and who had submitted the application because she had watched her grandmother carry the 2 years since Arthur's death with the specific, dignified, forward-moving quality that was Mabel's quality in every season, and who had thought, "She deserves an afternoon where the room knows who she is." And Mabel's great-niece Tanya, 31, a middle school science teacher from Shreveport who was here because she was in Atlanta for a conference, and because Mabel had said you are coming, and that was the end of the discussion. Kezia had submitted the application because she had watched her grandmother carry the deathbed confession for 2 years, carry it the way Mabel carried everything, which was completely and without requiring anyone to acknowledge the carrying, and because she had known from watching that the confession deserved a room and that Mabel deserved a room and that the right room had not yet arrived. She had not told Mabel what she hoped would happen. She had said, "I think you'll be good at this." Mabel had said, "I expect I will." The opposing family was the Bell family from Nashville, warm, competitive, well-organized, excellent, and going to find themselves in an afternoon that had more in it than they had anticipated when they drove to the taping. The pregame. Steve Harvey moved through both families with the customary warmth and arrived at Mabel with the specific, full attention. "I am going to be here for this quality that he brought to people who were going to have something real to say." He asked her about the 33 years of teaching second grade. She described it with the warm, direct, entirely matter-of-fact quality of someone for whom the work had been the obvious right thing for 33 years and who talked about it in the plain language of what it had been. "I taught children to read." He said, "That sounds simple." She said, "It is and it isn't." He said, "What is the hard part?" She said, "The hard part is that every child comes to reading from a different place. And if you teach them all from the same place, you lose the ones who started somewhere else." He said, "So you learned where each one started." She said, "That is the whole job." He said, "And then you met them there." She said, "And then I met them there. He received this." He filed it. He asked about Arthur. She said they had been married 51 years and that he had died 2 years ago. She said it in the plain, factual, this is the account voice. Steve Harvey said, "I'm sorry." She said, "Thank you." She received it with the warm, direct, "I have received this many times and I receive it now" quality of someone who had been receiving condolences for 2 years and who received each one with full attention. Steve Harvey said, "What kind of man was he?" She said, "A bridge builder." She said it in the specific, accurate, this is the right word voice. He looked at her. He said, "How do you mean?" She said, "He built things that were meant to carry weight he would never see." He said, "That's what he did for work." She said, "It's what he did for everything." Steve Harvey received this. He filed it. He said, "Is there something you want to tell me about him?" He said it in the specific following, "Tell me more" voice, the voice that he used when he had heard something and knew there was more and wanted to offer the opening. Mabel looked at him. She received the question. She said, "Yes." She said it in the plain, "I have been waiting for the right room" voice, though she did not say the second part. She said, "But let me wait until you ask me again." He said, "I will ask you again." She said, "I know you will." The game began. The first 2 rounds were warm and competitive. Mabel played with the specific, methodical. What is actually here intelligence of a second-grade teacher who had spent 33 years understanding where each child was, which was the intelligence of someone who read every room accurately before making a move, applied to survey questions with the warm, unhurried, entirely correct quality of someone who had a comprehensive model of what people thought and said and wanted because she had been inside the full range of it for 3 decades. She was right at the rate that the work produced, which was high and reliable. Patricia had her mother's directness applied to survey questions with the organized, "What is the argument intelligence of an attorney?" Reginald was methodical and accurate. Tanya had the science teacher's practical, ground level, "What do people actually do?" intelligence. And Kezia played with the focused, present, public health student's population-level accuracy of someone who had spent 3 years studying what large groups of people did and thought and valued. Steve Harvey returned to Mabel in the 3rd round in the brief pause between questions. He said, "I told you I would ask again." He said it in the quiet, following voice. He said, "What do you want to tell me about Arthur?" Mabel looked at him. She received the question with the specific, composed, "The room is ready" quality of someone who had been waiting for the room and who was now in it. She said, "He told me something in the last week." She said it in the plain, organized, I am going to say this correctly voice. "Before he died," she said, "I have been carrying it for 2 years and I have not known the right room for it." She looked at Steve Harvey. She said, "This might be the right room." Steve Harvey said, "I'm listening," she told him. She told him about the Thursday afternoon, about the March light, about Arthur asking everyone out and looking at her with the full, direct, "I have something to say" quality. She told him about Houston. The offer in 1978, the week he spent thinking about it, the Friday he turned it down without telling her. She told him why what Arthur had said about watching her build the school, about knowing she would have said take it and organized the move and given up what she was building without saying a word. She told him about the 44 years Arthur had kept it because he did not want her to feel she owed him anything. She told him what Arthur had said at the end. I turned down a road for a bridge. The bridge held more weight. I wanted you to know I did it knowing, and that I would do it again. She said all of it in the same plain, organized, this is what he said voice. She did not perform the telling. She told it the way she had been telling things her entire life, directly with the specific words that fit without decoration and without diminishment, the way a second-grade teacher told a story to a room that needed the whole thing and not just the parts the room was expecting. When she finished, the room was still. Steve Harvey was very still. He was looking at Mabel. He was in the receiving of it, in the specific, complete, going somewhere way of someone for whom a thing had arrived that had a particular, located weight, that had gone somewhere specific and that required a moment in the going. He looked at her for a long moment. He said in a voice that was quieter than his usual quiet voice, "He knew you would say take it." Mabel said, "Yes," he said, "and he knew what you would give up if you did." Mabel said, "Yes." "And he turned it down so you wouldn't have to give it up, and he didn't tell you so you wouldn't have to carry his choice." He said it in the flat, item-by-item, account being rendered voice, the voice of someone who needed to say the thing aloud to have it fully. He said, "For 44 years." Mabel said, "Yes." She said it in the same plain, confirming this is simply accurate voice. She said, "He said, I didn't want you to carry it. I turned it down freely and the not telling was the gift." Steve Harvey said, "The not telling was the gift." He stood with this. He was still. He was in the thing, in the specific, located, arrived somewhere quality of a man receiving something that had weight and that had gone somewhere particular and that was doing something in that particular somewhere and that required the something to be done before the next thing. He looked at Mabel. He looked at the room. He said in the quiet, "This is what I am going to do" voice. "I need a moment." He said it plainly. Without performance, without the apology that was not necessary, he said, "Excuse me for just a minute." And he walked off the stage. The room received this, not with the startled quality of a room surprised. With the warm understanding, we know why quality of a room that had been in the story and that understood what it had done to the man who received it and that was willing to wait. Studio was in the specific, gathered, patient stillness of 300 people who were holding the story while Steve Harvey held it off stage, and who were going to be here when he came back. Mabel stood at the podium with the specific, composed, entirely settled quality she had been carrying for 2 years. The quality of a woman who had been given the whole account of something and who had been sitting with the account, and who was going to keep sitting with it, in rooms large and small, for the rest of her life. She was not managing anything. She was simply present, in the way she had always been present, in the full, direct, nothing unaccounted for way of a woman who had spent 33 years meeting children where they were, and who brought the same quality to every other room she entered, including this one. Kezia, beside her, was in the specific, overwhelmed. I arranged this room, and the room is doing what I hoped quality of a granddaughter who had known the story and who had wanted a room large enough for it, and who was in that room. She was not managing anything either. Patricia was composed with the long, specific, I have known this story since Mama told me quality of a daughter who had received the confession second-hand, and who was in the room where it was being received fully by the first time. The room was large enough for it. Reginald had the warm, steady, "This is the family I married into" quality of a man who had been in this family for 28 years, and who found, in every year, more of what had produced the people he had married into. Tanya had the science teacher's clear-eyed, "This is what I am observing" quality of someone paying complete attention. Steve Harvey came back after 70 seconds. He walked back to the center of the stage with the same walk he always had, the specific, settled, I am here walk, except that the walk had in it the quality of a man who had been somewhere and who was back, and who was not pretending the somewhere had not happened. His face was composed. His eyes were bright in the specific, just been in something way. He looked at Mabel. He said, "Thank you for waiting." Mabel said, "Of course." He said, "I want to say something." He said it to the room, to the audience, and to the cameras, and to both families, and to Mabel. He said it in the organizing, plain, I have found the words voice of a man who had taken the time he needed and who was back with what he had found. He said, a man turned down a significant opportunity in 1978 so that his wife could continue building something he could see was important. He did not tell her. He did not tell her for 44 years. He did not tell her because he did not want her to carry his choice, because he had made the choice freely, and the freedom was the point, and the not telling protected the freedom. He said it in the flat, organized, rendering the account voice. And in the last week of his life, he told her, not because he needed forgiveness, not because the weight had become too much, but because he wanted her to have it before he went. He wanted her to know that the bridge held more weight than the road would have. He wanted her to know he did it knowing, and that he would do it again. He looked at Mabel. He said, the not telling was the gift. He paused. The not telling was the gift. He said, I want to ask you something, Mabel. And I want the real answer. Mabel said, you'll get it. He said, was it? She received the question. She was in it for a moment, not performing the being in it, simply in it, with the full, directed attention of a woman who had been sitting with this for 2 years. She said, yes and no. She said it in the organized, I am going to say this correctly, voice. The gift was the choice, the choosing me over the road. He could have told me about that choice at any time in 44 years, and it would have been the same gift. The not telling, she paused, she said. The not telling was his way of making sure I never wondered if the gift was about him. He wanted it to be clean. He didn't want me to carry the knowing of it for 44 years and wonder whether he had ever resented it. The not telling was the insurance on the gift. She said, that's Arthur. She said it in the plain, I knew this man voice. He built things to hold weight he would never see. He made the gift hold weight he would never see. Steve Harvey looked at her. He was still in the specific receiving quality, the eyes bright, the face composed, the quality of someone who had been somewhere and who was still on the edge of it. He said, he built the gift to hold weight he would never see. Mabel said, yes. She paused. She said, he always did. The room gave this its full, complete, warm attention. Steve Harvey said in the quiet voice, what did you say to him when he told you? Mabel said, I said you should have told me. She said it in the plain, direct, this is what I said voice. He said, I know, I said it wasn't yours to carry alone. He said, I know that too. He said, I'm sorry. He said, I'm telling you now because I want you to have it. She paused. I said, I have it. She paused again. I do. She said it in the quiet, confirmed, this is still true voice of someone reporting on the state of something 2 years later. I still have it, every day. Steve Harvey said, every day. She said, every day he is not here I have what he told me he did. That is not small. She said it in the plain, factual, I am describing the actual thing voice. Most people who lose someone spend a long time wondering whether the person knew, whether they were seen, whether the choices they made together were the right ones. She said, he told me, before he went, he told me, I am not wondering about any of it. She looked at Steve Harvey with the direct, warm, this is the point expression. That is the gift, the knowing, that is what he gave me. She said, it is enough. She said it in the specific, settled, not performing the sufficiency voice of someone for whom the thing was genuinely enough and who was reporting this accurately. More than enough, it is everything. Steve Harvey was quiet for a moment. He said, he met you where you were. He said it in the quiet voice, making the connection to what she had said about the teaching, that the whole job was meeting children where they were. He said, 44 years of it, and at the end he came to you where you were one more time. He said it in the plain, finding the thread voice of someone who had heard everything and who had found the thread that ran through it. Mabel received this. She received it in the specific, still, accurate description, received quality. She said, yes, she said, that is exactly right. She said it with the warm, settled, I have been trying to say this quality of someone who had been carrying a description and who had just been given the right words for it by someone else. He met me where I was, all of it. He met me where I was. Steve Harvey looked at the room. He said, let's play Family Feud. He said it in the warm, forward-moving, the afternoon continues voice, because the afternoon continued, and the game was the thing, and Mabel was ready, and the room was ready, and the game was going to be the right thing now. The game resumed. What it revealed was a team playing together with the warm, organized, entirely present quality of a family that had been somewhere together, and that was now doing the next thing together with the weight of the somewhere making the doing fuller. Mabel played with the same methodical, meet them where they are accuracy she had been bringing from the beginning. The teacher's intelligence, the woman who has been paying attention for 79 years' intelligence, applied to the survey with the warm, unhurried, entirely reliable competence of someone whose standard had been the same for a very long time and who was not going to lower it now. She was right. The board confirmed it. She received the confirmations with the warm, unsentimental, the work is good quality of someone whose relationship with being correct was a long, mutual, unsurprising acquaintance. The Gaines family won the main game. Mabel went first in fast money. There was no discussion. She walked to the podium with the specific, upright, I have been walking into rooms my whole life walk of a woman who had walked into a great many rooms and who had never let a room tell her where to stand. Steve Harvey looked at her from across the stage. He said, 33 years, 51 years, he met you where you were every time. He said it in the plain, direct, full account voice. He said, the bridge held more weight. He looked at her. Show this room what that produces in 20 seconds. Mabel said, start the clock. He hit the button. Mabel Gaines answered 5 Family Feud survey questions in 20 seconds with the specific, methodical, warm, entirely accurate intelligence of a woman who had spent 33 years understanding where people were and meeting them there, and who had spent 51 years being met in return. and who had carried both practices, the giving and the receiving, into the survey with the same unhurried, patient, entirely correct quality she had brought to everything for 79 years. She was not fast in the mechanical sense. She was exact, the teacher's exactness. The what is right for this specific child exactness applied to what is right for this specific question with the same thorough. One at a time, nothing rushed quality. 4 of her 5 answers were number 1. Her 5th answer, delivered at 18 seconds in Mabel's voice, the plain, warm, this is what is here voice that had been the voice she used in rooms for 79 years, was number 1. Kezia in the second seat scored 82 points with the focused, precise public health student's accuracy. Combined total, 277 points, $20,000. Steve Harvey brought the check. He carried it to Mabel and he held it and he said, Arthur turned down a road and built a bridge. The bridge held for 51 years, and then in a room with March light he gave you the knowing of it. He held the check between them. This is the room saying, we know too, we know what he did. We know what you built, we know the bridge held. He held the check out. $20,000 for a woman who met every child where they were for 33 years, and who was met in return for 51. Mabel took the check. She held it with the same quality she held everything, directly, completely, without ceremony, because ceremony was the embellishment of something complete, and she did not add embellishment to complete things. She looked at Patricia, who was her daughter and who had been beside her for 2 years, and who was looking at her mother with the full, warm, I have known this woman my whole life quality of someone watching a person they knew entirely be received by a room fully, for perhaps the first time in a room this large. She looked at Kezia, who had arranged the room and who had known the room was the right room, and who was confirming this quietly and completely. She looked at Reginald, who was steady and warm. She looked at Tanya, who was in Atlanta for a conference and who was going to be telling this story for years. She said to the room and to all of it, he said, I would do it again, that is the part I live in. She said it in the plain, direct, this is what I want to say voice. Not the secret and not the telling, the I would do it again. He knew what he was doing, he knew what it cost. He said he would do it again. She said, that is the man I married, that is the bridge he was. She looked at Steve Harvey, she said, I am glad you asked me again. She said it with the warm, direct, I said wait, and you waited quality of someone acknowledging that the promise had been kept. Steve Harvey said, I told you I would. She said, I know. She said, that's how I knew this was the right room. The episode aired 8 weeks later, with Mabel's consent, and with the family's review of the cut, and with the specific, careful quality of a production that had understood what it had been in the presence of, and that had made the choices accordingly. The clip spread in the specific, wide, deeply personal way of things that named something that crossed every boundary of circumstance. That named the particular, specific, entirely ordinary form of extraordinary love that most love actually was, which was not the grand gesture or the dramatic declaration, but the choice made quietly, without audience, for the other person, at some cost, freely, without the expectation of acknowledgement, and with the intention that the other person remain unburdened by the knowing. The specific form Arthur had used, the not telling as the insurance on the gift, traveled as a concept in the specific, recognizing, I have seen this or done this way of people watching a thing they knew described from the inside. Several wrote about choices they had made that the other person did not know about. Several wrote about asking after seeing the clip and finding out that the person beside them had done the same. Several said, I asked my husband, I asked my wife, I asked my mother, I found out there was a Houston. Several said they had been the one who chose and who had watched the other person build something for years and who had received in the clip the specific confirmation that the watching was its own reward and the building was its own bridge and that the bridge was still holding. Several wrote about the I would do it again, specifically, that those 4 words were the ones that had stayed longest, that the gift of hearing someone say I would do it again was the gift of knowing the choice was not a burden and never had been and never would be, and that was the whole gift, the complete gift, nothing added, nothing taken away. Mabel was asked, in the single brief statement she made to a journalist from the Atlanta paper who had found her through the school where she had last taught. She was asked how she was. She said, I am well. She said it in the plain, accurate, this is simply the report voice. She said, I have what he gave me every day. She said, he said the bridge held more weight than the road would have. She said, I believe him. She said, the children from that school are adults now. Some of them have children of their own. Some of them are teachers. Some of them came to the funeral. She said, that is the weight the bridge held. That is what he could see. She paused. She said, he was always a better engineer than he was credited for being. She said it with the warm, specific, I knew this man voice. She said, the structures he built are still standing. She said, all of them. There are confessions and there are confessions. Arthur made the second kind. In March light, in the last week of his life, he gave Mabel the knowing of the choice he had made 44 years before, the choice made freely, without burden, with the specific, forward-looking, I am building something that will hold quality that he had brought to everything, including the marriage. He built the gift to hold weight he would never see. Mabel has it, every day. The bridge held more weight than the road would have. He would do it again. She knows it. Steve Harvey walked off the stage for 70 seconds and came back with the words for it. She told him those were the right words. He met her where she was. That is the whole job. He always did that. All of it. Every time. If this story reached you, if you have a Houston you chose not to take, or if you are wondering whether the person beside you has won, share this today. Leave a comment below and tell us what you are carrying from this story, because this community carries things together and your voice here matters. And subscribe right now if you are not already with us, because every single week we come back with stories exactly like this one. Stories about the choices made quietly. Stories about the bridges built to hold weight you will never see. And stories about the man who said I would do it again, and the woman who has it every day, and the room that finally knew. We will see you in the next one.